Hi, I'm George Norrie, and welcome to our Coast to Coast AM YouTube channel. Have fun, tell your friends, and share us with everyone. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Coast to Coast AM's mobile app. And always remember to log on to our website at coasttocoastam.com for daily articles, the best paranormal information, and all you need to know about your favorite guests. And now you can become a Coast Insider directly through the Coast mobile app. We welcome our international listeners and even offer a free 2-week trial. So don't delay. Become an insider today.
It's a huge factor for your own perception of reality, meeting a different being.
The whole planet deserves to know the truth. You may be one of the few people who might be able to help us understand.
Species are brought together on a table and have diplomatic conversations
This is
with each other.
happening?
This is happening.
Where? Give an example. What happened with you?
This great being enters the room. It's a strong, crisp frequency that your body reacts to.
It's happening. It's happening behind the scenes. I mean, Tim, what is the true history of Earth?
And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Noted author Whitley Strieber with us, best-selling author of more than 30 best-selling books, including Communion and Superstorm that he wrote with the late Art Bell. His latest work is called Them. Whitley, welcome back, my friend. How have you been?
Oh, busy. I'm glad to be back, though. I have been working on them for years, and that's why people haven't heard much of me except on my website and on Dreamland. The book completely possessed me, and I think I've made some major breakthroughs, so I'm glad it's out and available in every format, including audio. It's been a journey.
Well, good for you. You know, there are a lot of books on UFOs. You have written most of them. But what makes this one so different? Them.
Well, first of all, most of my books on the subject have been about my experiences.
That's right.
This one is not, except the last chapter, which we'll get to. What I tried to do here was to take another look at a subject that we're not getting anywhere with. Kevin's report just a few minutes ago was telling us that the government is going to continue to stonewall, and I'll tell you why over the course of this show. They will continue to stonewall. They will not. There is not going to be a magic moment of disclosure unless it is induced in some way, from the outside in some way. And from the outside, I mean outside of government, not necessarily landing or anything like that, but something that compels them. And right now, I don't see that happening. We're getting nowhere fast. That's why there were only a couple of senators in that room, because they already knew that there was nothing was going to be said, and many of them know that what is being said is essentially a lie.
We're taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps backward then, aren't we?
That's exactly what we're doing. Well, for example, the claim has been made that there is no contact at all. However, the intelligence community certainly knows that there is. And the reason I'm aware of that is very simple. Dr. David Webb, who was a member of the National Commission on Space and was chairman of space studies at the Center for Aerospace Sciences at the University of North Dakota, and had been, according to what he told us, in the intelligence community for many years, spent time at our cabin in upstate New York and with us in New York, and was a close friend. He is acknowledged, in fact, in the introduction of Communion, because of his support. Now, he was certainly talking to people in the intelligence community about what he was finding at that cabin. He never had a direct close encounter himself, but he did, I believe, as I recall, meet people who had, and he certainly had very extensive conversations with us. So those reports exist somewhere, but that's not the only thing. There must be thousands of pages of reports about this experience to the point where, as I point out in my book, the nature of the situation being so secret, and as I have been told many times by many people on the inside, the rule of thumb is pencils up during meetings. You don't take notes. You don't commit anything to paper. And in fact, Arthur Exon, General Exon, who was, I believe, a lieutenant colonel at Wright Field when the Roswell materials were brought in, and was a family friend, told me in 1988 that he was still going to Wright Pat to liaise with the scientific committee that was working on this subject.
Wow.
Because there was so little paperwork from the past, and they had to know what had been done and also where to find what did exist. Now, if there is ever a time when any historians start trying to put this story together, you know what their primary source material is going to have to be? It's going to have to be the newspapers of the period, because the official record is going to turn out to be gone. And I know that for certain for a simple reason. A congressman called Congressman Schiff. He was a Republican from New Mexico. He's not the Schiff that's there now. He's passed on, in fact.
Was it Adam Schiff?
Adam, yeah. I always want to say Stephen, and I can't. I know that's wrong. It's Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff was elected by that area of New Mexico to find out the truth about the Roswell incident.
That's right. That is right.
Yeah, and when he went to the Defense Department, they stonewalled him. And he called around to various people, including me, saying, what should I do? And I said, my thought was, go to the General Accounting Office. They have to answer their questions by law. They don't have to answer yours. So he did. And the GAO found that every single piece of paperwork from Roswell Army Air Force from 1947 to 1952 had been, quote, illegally destroyed. Everything.
Wow.
And, you look at that and you think, well, what were they doing? Why would they bother to do that? And then here's another piece of telling evidence that nobody ever thinks about or ever talks about. The debris was taken from Roswell to Dallas to Wright in a special aircraft. Now, if it was just a radar target, what was that plane doing? They wouldn't take something they all recognized all the way to Wright Field for analysis at the Air Materiel Command.
It would be a wasted trip.
Of course they didn't take that. And, the idea that this never happened is absurd. It's an insult. But you have to ask the question, why are their heels so deeply dug in? And I think you're talking right now to one of the reasons, one of the thousands of reasons. A lot of us have had contact, and not all of it has been very pleasant. A lot of it's been real hard. And what are they going to do with us? Because the minute they say, this is real, there's someone here, the next step is Fox, CNN, all of them, Coast, all of them, are going to be having us on to tell our stories. And the government has got to say, Yeah, we knew these people had sexual material taken from them in the middle of the night, things done to their children. We couldn't do anything about it. And so we lied, and we made light of it, and we made them look like fools.
Because we didn't want to scare them, right?
Right. I somehow suspect they're not going to want to say that at all under any circumstance.
No.
So that's why I don't think disclosure is going to happen, that people are all waiting for.
I've told Stephen Bassett that, Whitley, for years, too, that disclosure is just not going to happen.
Well, it's very courageous of people like Stephen Bassett who keep on keeping on with this.
Yep, and Greer, those people, they
all
keep
those
pushing.
people, because if they don't, it will never happen. But if they do, you never know. It may happen.
What we'll get was whistleblowers who release information to people like you and me and Steve Bassett.
Yeah, but the problem I have with that is I know the realities of secrecy.
Being a whistleblower, you're in trouble.
Well, yeah. I mean, what are these whistleblowers who come out and say these things and they don't get into trouble? I find that very hard to believe. I know people, plenty of people, who keep very, very serious secrets, and they would never breathe a word of it to anyone. I don't know myself what their secrets are. I just know they're in positions to keep such secrets, and I would never ask them. I would never ask them because if you know somebody is keeping it, it happens to be illegal to ask them. So, when I see this, whenever I see someone is a whistleblower, my radar, I become very suspicious that they might be making it up. And some of them probably have a locomotion from the intelligence community, especially the ones that are in the military.
To send people down the wrong path.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I don't buy into whistleblowers personally. And people who are revealing classified information and not getting dinged for it. I don't think so.
To me, one of the best sources, Whitley, over the years was the late Edgar Mitchell, Apollo 14 astronaut.
Yeah, Edgar was pretty straightforward. Did you ever interview him?
Many times. I'd like to be able to say I was his friend after the years I've known him. And, he told me, he said, George, I've never seen a UFO when I was on the moon, but I've been told by people that I work with in government that we are being visited. And he was dead serious.
Edgar said things privately that he didn't say publicly. And I didn't know that when I interviewed him, I did a couple of coasts for Art over in the past. I thought he'd talk about the same things publicly that he talked about privately, and I really got into trouble with the interview because he wouldn't answer any of my questions.
You're going, is this the same guy?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I thought, my God, this is a different man. And I used up all my questions the first half hour, and I was desperate. But he knew a lot of things, and he had a lot of information that he kept to himself. But I'll tell you, remember Lawrence Rockefeller, who was...
Oh, yeah, I remember that stuff.
Fabulous guy. Anyway, he took me and Edgar and John Mack and John's friend and Ann to the Medway Plantation in South Carolina. The three of us went to Medway Plantation with Lawrence, basically to spend a weekend just talking together and sort of seeing what could come out. And at that meeting, there were a lot of things said that were never said anywhere else. Basically, by me and by his name slipped out of my head. The astronaut we were talking about,
Edgar Mitchell.
Edgar, of course. Yeah, I'm so sorry. But in any case, and Edgar was particularly loquacious about alien species and so forth that he knew were around, and things I didn't think we really had any proof of, but he insisted we did. But never did I hear him speak about any of these things in any even semi-public situation.
No, you're
That was
right.
the only time he really opened up, and so he knew things. He knew a lot of things that he didn't talk about, and I've often wondered where that information came from. I know there's a briefing that I know some people who have gotten it. They've gotten a long 2-day briefing. I believe Jim Semivan has mentioned that he got that briefing that goes through the whole history of this insofar as it is still remembered. And my guess is that a lot of that information is in the briefing. And, it worries me. It worries me because there's a lot of lying going on in this, and it's not all from us. The visitors, or whatever they are, do not necessarily tell the truth, but there's a tendency to assume that whatever they say must be true. And this business of Jimmy Carter allegedly being told that they created our religions and modified, created us genetically, and it upset him so terribly. They don't necessarily tell the truth. And, we can't just believe them simply because it's them at all, not at all. And that worries me that these briefings have been created by people who are not close to them and do not know how they are. And therefore, they would believe what they were told. General Nathan Twining's son said after General Twining had died that he had encountered the living one that was brought from Roswell to Wright Field. Now, General Exton told me that there were bodies. He never mentioned a living one. I have to say that. But the thing that was so telling about this thing that Twining's son says is that it said to Twining telepathically, "We have no interest in humanity." In other words, it lied.
It
That
lied.
is absolutely false.
That was their main interest.
Exactly. And if you start out a relationship with a lie, how much truth is going to come out of any contact with
Exactly.
them? And the answer is not a lot. But I think that you're going to find stuff like the Eisenhower memo that are real, that this is what these people have been told and what they have very innocently believed. And I'm telling you, I've known these entities a long time, and you don't cut the cards yourself, you're going to be immediately in trouble because they're not going to be straight with you.
Whitley, you have divided your book, Them, into 2 parts. What are those parts?
Part 1 is an analysis of 11 letters that we received. One of them received just a couple of months ago, and the other 10 received years ago when Communion came out. And these letters, some of them appear in the book, The Communion Letters, and I've known about some of them for a long time. But I've changed. I am able to analyze these things much more deeply than I could years ago, simply because of years of contact, of careful observation of what I was, the habits and activities of what I was in contact with, insofar as that's been possible, and a lot of research, talking to people, and I was able to analyze these letters in some very, very new and very deep ways. And there's never been anything like this, these analysis of these letters, and never anything. And another thing about the letters, my wife Ann collected all of these letters. She put them in an archive. She created an archive, which was in basically plastic file boxes in a storage space in Texas for years, because no one wanted it. No one cared about this archive. All of these letters. Anne used to say, even if these are not these things are not real. This is the most extraordinary archive of modern folklore in the world, and no one wants it. And finally, Jeff Kripal, God love him and bless him, my co-author on Supernatural, who really pulled me out of the doghouse and brought me into the academic community in a very good way.
He did. Yeah, he did.
Created this archive, the archive of the impossible, and there's all kinds of people. Jacques Vallée's papers are there. The letters are there. And it's quite wonderful because they're all beautifully organized now in file boxes. And, I was able to study them, and it was possible to do things that I had never done before.
Whitley, tell us the story of the woman and her little girl out there in the desert.
Well, that's quite a story. This is the situation. A woman is taking her daughter to California. The daughter's a child. She's about, I think, 2 or 3. And they're driving across country from Texas. I think the woman was a student, and she was going to matriculate at a school in California, as I recall. I might have that wrong. I'm not sure. Anyway, she decides they will cross the Mojave Desert at night, because this is back in the 60s. And in those days, cars were not friendly to crossing extremely hot deserts during the day.
No, that's true.
Yeah, absolutely. So she certainly didn't want to end up stopped on the in the desert. So they're crossing the desert at night, and all of a sudden the little girl begins to notice lights in the sky, a light in the sky. And the woman sees it and realizes this light is following them. They're on the highway, and now the woman is already under the influence of whoever is in that object. Because what decisions does she make? Not to turn around and go back to Flagstaff where they'd started. Not to race down the highway at 90 miles an hour to try to get away from it. No, instead, she decides it would be a good idea to drive off onto a lonely side road into the desert, which she does. They're off on that lonely side road when suddenly she is pulled out, and the daughter with her, of the car, right through the windshield, which remains intact. And that's not unusual in this experience. This happens a lot.
Like beamed out?
Yeah, they have absolute control. One of them once said to an abductee years ago, one of Bud's group, "We rearrange atoms." It's one of the most important things that they ever said, because if you have the ability to control the forces that hold atoms together, you can do essentially anything with matter. Anything. You can change you become a magician. And that ability to do that, and I'm sure they have it, would mean that you could do something like walk through a wall or pull someone through a windshield without breaking it, et cetera, and so forth. And so that they end up in this space with all of these TV screens in it, as she described it. Now, there were probably no TV screens in there, but it was a symbolic indication of the fact that they were in a different technological environment. Because the brain is going to put things together. If something makes no sense, what it's seeing, the brain will try to make it make sense. So something that might look very different from a TV screen will become a TV monitor, because the brain doesn't have any other information to put that particular visual impression together. Anyway, they're there. The daughter is gone, and the mother is in this situation, and she's told, and this is another fascinating characteristic of the whole experience, she's told that she's a member of a very ancient family called the family of Ram, R-A-M-N, and that they are there because they wanted to reconnect with her. And they are very careful to give her a name. And just let me get it pulled up here.
The ETs gave her a name?
Yeah, well, they did more than that. They said that this had been always her name, and for many, many thousands of years, and that this name, it was essential that she remember this name. She had to remember it. And they told it to her again and again and again and made her memorize it. And when we first got the letter years ago, I thought, well, that's interesting. And, I sort of, went past it because I was so interested in what then had happened to the little girl. Because when they ended up back in the car, the mother had not seen the girl when she was in this place with these people. And now she's back in the car, and the little girl screams out to her mother, "I hate you." And what could it mean? I hate you. And the mother's terribly upset.
At 2 years old.
2 or 3. Very young to be saying anything remotely like that.
Exactly.
And they get to California, and the little girl tells the mother that these people told her that there were bugs inside her, and they couldn't get them out. They couldn't cure her, and that she was going to die. She then gets a disease, a disease of the nervous system, a cancer of the nervous system, very rare, happens in childhood. The mother, desperate to save her child, rushes back to Texas with her where she perceives that there are better doctors in Houston, and the child dies of the cancer. And now the mother is incredibly, of course, distraught, and she has told no one what happened in the desert. But she's now in Austin, and a few days after the little girl has died, she gets a call from a friend in Houston who's legally blind. But this friend says, "I'm coming up to see you, and I'm leaving right now. I have something to tell you. I cannot tell you on the phone. I don't know how to do that." And she says, "But you're blind. You're nearly blind." She says, "I don't care. I'm coming." She hangs up the phone, and in a few hours, there she is in Austin. And she tells this story. "I woke up in the middle of the night, and the entire roof of my house was gone. It was just blackness. And there were these 2 beings there, and your daughter was standing between them. And they said to me they had been trying to get through to you, but they couldn't because you were so grief-stricken you weren't able to notice them. And they wanted me to tell you that your daughter is all right." And this is characteristic of this experience. There are many, many cases, even cases that happened in our cabin, where people are brought or show up spontaneously on their own to say that they are all right. In fact, when that would happen at the cabin, it would usually happen before the visitors showed up. And Anne would always say, when one of the guests that was there would come in sort of bemusedly and say, "I saw, Laurie Barnes, Anne's secretary, is one of them. She was walking on the road in front of the cabin. She comes sort of staggering in and says, 'I just saw my brother.'" And that was extraordinary because her brother had been missing for 20 years, and the FBI had given up the search. He went missing.
Sounds like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, doesn't it?
In a way it does, yeah. But the brother, there he was, standing in the road. And Laurie said, "My God, why don't you come down and meet my friends?" And the brother says, well, I just am here to tell you I'm all right. And then he smiled at her and drifted back into the woods and disappeared.
Whitley, I think the congressman was Stephen Schiff from New Mexico. Yeah. Adam's the current one.
Is Adam the current one? I get their names mixed up. You know, the older you get, the more names you know. The more names you know, the more mixed up you become.
Absolutely. So tell us about the alien abduction phenomena. Is that all tied into Close Encounters?
Well, the abduction phenomenon, I mean, I had that happen to me, so I'm definitely part of it, is a subset of a very much larger experience that mankind is having with this. Like, for example, if you go into the Communion Letters Archive, you find very few descriptions of abductions. There's some, certainly. I mean, there's a significant minority of, let me put it that way. They're not that rare, but they're certainly not the majority. The actual truth is that the experience is so varied, so complex, that it's the most complex thing that has ever happened to human beings. And this is one of the things that this book, when you read those letters all together and the analysis of the letters, you realize this is something. Something is happening to these people. And it is very different. Like, there's one guy, I'm back in correspondence with some of them. Some of them are still with us, and with him, and he still remembers this experience like it was yesterday. He was working late, and he came home in the early hours of the morning and went to bed, and as he put it, it felt like his head exploded, like he no longer existed. Now, there's a syndrome called exploding head syndrome, if you can believe it, where the head doesn't actually explode, but the person has this
pressure,
this feeling that their head is exploded.
Yeah.
And he had that, but then something happened that was very different. You'd think if that was the only thing the letter was about, you would send him a note saying, well, why don't you talk to a neurologist and he'll tell you about what happened to you. And you had this thing called exploding head syndrome, which is a known syndrome. But a little while later, this noise comes over his house, this throbbing noise, and he begins to feel as if his soul is being pulled out of his body. And this is, I mean, we live in a civilization where we deny that the soul even exists. And most of us, we would say, oh, I believe I have a soul, but we don't feel that. You don't feel that. And, we look at death and we think, well, do I have a soul? So here he is, and he starts to struggle with this, and finally his wife embraces him and ends up embracing him on top of him. And they're struggling with this thing throbbing above the house, and his soul going up, and his wife calling to him and holding him and saying, don't leave, don't leave. And this goes on for 2.5 hours through the whole night. And then at dawn, as dawn breaks, the throbbing noise slowly disappears into the night, into what is left of the night, and they're left alone. Now, what in the world was that about?
Exactly.
Was someone trying to steal his soul? Or was someone trying to replace it? What was going on there? George, we don't know where we are or what we are or who in the world is here with us.
Are these visitors trying to communicate with us, Whitley?
Yes, some of them. And if you read the book, you find that there are parts of this that indicate there is real hope for something happening here that's positive and good for us. But there's also a darker side to it, no question. Like the abductions, just go back to that, and then we'll talk about communication in a second. The abductions were basically, they're not going on very much anymore. You rarely hear about them. And, we would get the reports at Unknown Country if they were happening a lot. And we do get reports, but on the order of 10 or 12 a year, not 10 or 12 a day, which would have been the case in the 70s. So it was an operation of some kind that went on, and it started in the late 60s and went into the late 90s, and then it kind of tapered off. But what was consistently done is sexual material was taken from people. I had it taken from me. Many women lost eggs and fetuses. And what happened? What was done? I think the core of the secrecy is the fact that this was done, and when it was done, it meant that the visitors did not have to worry about being exposed because they knew the government, unable to stop this, would never reveal it, would never admit that this was happening, and they didn't understand it and they couldn't stop it. And believe me, I know people deep in this, and this is their primary concern. This is the reason. This is the core reason for the secrecy, right here.
Now, in part 2, you talk about a conflict between the military and the visitors. What is that conflict?
Well, it started very early, and it was intentionally brought on by the visitors. They did this. They did it on purpose, but it's not because. It's because for whatever reason, they can't or won't just sit down and talk with us. I don't think they can, and I'll tell you why in a little while. What they did was, it started before the Roswell incident. There were missiles, German missiles being tested at White Sands. These missiles had been confiscated from the Nazis as World War II ended, and they were testing them at White Sands in order to understand how they worked. And stuff began to happen to them. Something would shoot at them, and they would be destroyed. And so
while they were testing them, they would be disintegrated. Yeah.
And this was, of course, the beginning of the atomic age. And what was happening was that someone was trying to maybe prevent us from using missiles or to warn us about them, because they would have known that atomic warheads were going to end up on those missiles. And they may have even known that eventually there would be many countries capable of firing missiles. Like right now, Iran is trying to get an atomic bomb and a missile capable of reaching Israel, because Israel is such a small country. They know that a big enough atomic weapon can ruin the country forever, and they will fire that if they can, and the Israelis know it. There's no question about it. If they were able to do that, they would destroy Israel.
They would try, that's for sure.
They would succeed. If they got an atomic warhead detonated anywhere over that area of the world, they would succeed. And as I say, the Israelis know how vulnerable they are. And that's why they have such a massive program in Iran to continually screw up their progress with their atomic weapons. In any case, that's not really part of our story. The point is that early on, the visitors knew that atomic weapons were extremely dangerous. And now, what then happens is this crash occurs north of Roswell, 30 miles away. Now, why are we testing missiles? Why are we frantically building up a nuclear arsenal? The reason is that there are 4.5 million Russian troops poised at the Iron Curtain in Central Europe, ready to sweep across and take all of Western Europe and quite possibly the UK as well. The only thing stopping them is the fact that we have the 509th Bomber Wing, which is stationed at Roswell Army Airfield and is the only atomic bomber wing in the world. Russia does not have the atomic bomb yet. And it is capable. Those planes some of them will get through because Russia does not have sufficiently sophisticated anti-aircraft defenses to stop them. And Stalin knows this. And this is what prevents him from invading Western Europe. Now, something crashes, an unknown craft, a few miles from that base. Are they worried? They're worried. They're very worried. And I think, and I can't prove this, I can't find documentation about this, but one of the old officers who's now passed on, Walter Haut, hinted to me that they didn't have a fully the wing was not fully operational at the time, which meant that there weren't a sufficient number of atomic bombs available because it takes so long to build them in those days, and they were just starting out. And if that craft had been a Russian craft that had landed people with Geiger counters or had a longer range measuring device aboard, it would have found that there wasn't enough radiation leaking out at the airbase to justify the presence of a lot of nuclear weapons. So the whole world's freedom was hanging in the balance as far as the Air Force was concerned. And of course, this crash was immediately known all the way up the line to higher headquarters. And then, as Arthur Exon put it, when they began to gather the debris, reports started to come back that were utterly fantastic, that there were bodies of people there that were not human beings. And this is 1947. Remember, nobody knows a thing about aliens. We have no idea yet how big the universe actually is. There's no such thing as a radio telescope. We don't know much about the universe around us. And all of a sudden, something out of a science fiction story appears to be real.
Yeah.
And these people, they had no idea how to deal with it. That's why Art said to me, not Bell, said to me, everyone from Truman on down knew what we had found was not of this world within 24 hours of our finding it. That's a quote. Now, let's understand something about the visitors. They don't have the same relationship to death that we do. They are in command. There's no veil between the living and the dead for them. That's why in the earlier story, they had the little girl, they are in control of that level of reality, meaning that dying doesn't mean as much to them.
They probably download thoughts and brains and put it in cloned bodies and just continue.
Well, exactly. I mean, you don't know how they do it, but they whatever happened at Roswell, I think they meant to crash that device there. I think, and they did it because they knew that it would be the beginning of secrecy, and they knew they could not do what they wanted to do with us without the government being completely secretive about it.
So you're saying they engineered the secrecy?
They engineered the secrecy from the beginning. Whether they did it on purpose or by accident, I cannot know. But it was their actions that caused the secrecy. And during the abduction period, the secrecy was essential. They couldn't do that. If we had known that was happening, this would have been, you talk about guns, we got guns now. We would have had a fairly large number of guns at that point.
Oh, yeah.
And there would have been lights everywhere. People would have been waiting for them.
Especially if the government said, we can't stop this.
Exactly. But instead, it was all kept secret, and they were free to do what they wanted to do. Now, the interesting thing is now the situation is different. The planet's in some kind of a crisis environmentally. We see that things happening all the time that are very strange. I mean, Art and I wrote Superstorm, and sometimes it looks like it's about to happen. And we also have the proliferation of nuclear weapons into the hands of irresponsible states like North Korea and Iran. And so we've got, and Russia, I should add, is also an irresponsible state at this point. But I don't have much expectation that their nuclear arsenal is very real, for the simple reason that it is powered by liquid fuel missiles that are all very old. And I think that if Russia tries to start a nuclear war, what you're going to find are a lot of odd explosions in Siberia and probably not many missiles, if any, rising up. But it only takes one.
I was just going to say that. That's all you need.
Yeah, only takes one. So you've got these two things that the visitors have been concerned about from the get-go: nuclear war and environment. They do want us to survive, no question. I don't know what their motives are. They might not be good, might not be to our liking, but they definitely want us to survive. So their situation has now changed. They no longer need secrecy. They need to come out and to be known. And I think that might happen, but if it does happen, it's going to be them who engineered it, not us. The government, as I've said earlier, and for reasons that are very obvious, is going to be dragged kicking and screaming into this. It's not going to be telling anything unless they have to. And the visitors could make them do it, I'm sure.
When you were writing them, something happened to you that caused you to leave your home. What happened?
Oh, my God, George. I put some things happened. I don't want to get into it too deeply, but what I will say is this.
It was bizarre, wasn't it?
I would be meditating in here at 11 o'clock at night, and suddenly there'd be a huge explosion on my deck. And then there were very strange people watching me. I mean, it was really weird.
Humans?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You got to understand, this is not entirely. This whole thing has a human component, and believe me, whether they're hybrids or exactly what they are, I don't know. But they became very difficult. They entered this apartment, and I went during early morning exercise and came back from exercise to find the whole place all the drawers had been pulled open, and
jeez.
Obviously someone had been in here.
Raided your place.
Yeah, they didn't steal anything, but they just made it known that they had been in there.
Were they looking for something?
I think they were trying to intimidate me.
Uh-huh.
Because then a couple days later, I was sitting in a park with one of my grandkids, and I just had this funny feeling that I should look at the website. So I opened up my phone and got into the back end of the website, and lo and behold, someone had all the admin usernames, and they were trying to brute force passwords and get into the site.
Into your site?
Yeah, into my site. And so I called the webmaster.
Hold on for a second, Whitley. We'll let you finish that story when we come back. Plus, I want to get into some more of these issues in your book, Them. And welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with Whitley Strieber. So Whitley was hearing strange explosions outside, strange people watching him. Comes home one day and his house is ransacked, nothing taken, but everything disheveled. What do you think's going on here, Whitley?
Well, I was obviously under pressure. Then I had some video of some of the explosions because this place is full of cameras, and whoever was doing it became aware of this because I dropped some of it onto my YouTube channel. And the next explosion that occurred, I was meditating, and I saw the red lights go on the cameras in the living room indicating that they had turned off. Then the explosion occurred. But it was picked up, the sound was picked up on the camera in the den. And so that told me that this was no ordinary event. This wasn't kids with firecrackers, because kids with firecrackers can't do things to the electronics like that. And the way it all started was the night before the ransacking. A fault appeared in my router indicating that there was an unknown computer attempting to lock onto my network, because I have a network alarm that shows anyone outside of the network trying to get in. And so I had figured the router might be insecure or it might have a fault. So I had unplugged it for the first time in years. And it was that morning that they showed up. That morning.
Oh,
and it was no accident, because they were the ones who caused the router to start giving me trouble, I'm sure. Do you see how sinister this all is?
It really is bizarre.
Really bizarre. It gets worse. The next thing I knew, I'm in the park. Me and the webmaster are frantically chasing down whoever's hacking and closing off all of the URLs that they are coming from, locking them down. And finally it stops, and I go back to my house, and the first thing I want to do, of course, is open my computer and look at the website. Now, we had taken this precaution. We were concerned that they may have access to the site in some way, to the admin area, and there were only two people who can get in the admin area, me and my webmaster. So he had changed both of our passwords in the back end. In other words, at no time was a password transmitted to me in any way on Signal or WhatsApp or any encrypted email or anything. It was even more secure than that. So I was pretty sure I was okay, and I wanted to see if I was concerned that the site might have been damaged. I opened my laptop, I put in the password, got onto the site, and instantly they were there using my brand new username and my brand new password and wrecking the site.
Jeez, they knew what they were doing.
Methodically wrecking the site. In other words, they didn't just take it down, because if they took it down, we got a lot of backups, let me put it that way. We could have backed it all up, but what they did was started methodically damaging the site in all kinds of ways, moving with unbelievable speed. But it didn't end even there. The next thing that happened was a friend who had never worked on the back end of the site, had briefly had an admin access, but it had been cut off for weeks because she decided she didn't want to work on it. Her personal email started being that she'd been sent out for the past 6 months, suddenly started flooding back into her computer. Meanwhile, her name ended up in the back end of the site, and it looked like she was taking over admin of the website. But at this point, I understood this woman had nothing whatsoever to do with any of this. She did not know what in the world was going on.
Either did you.
No, I knew more about it than you might think, because there are two things. I've had these kinds of attacks before. It's not the first time. This was the worst one by far. But there are two things that will happen in these attacks that make me quite sure that it's something very unusual about who's behind this. One is they will always try to make it look like someone I need, like my webmaster, is at fault, is doing it. And they will always also try to come between me and people I love trying to make it seem as if they are part of this.
They're the ones, yeah.
So at this point, I'm trying to write a book here. And, I can't sleep, let alone write a book under these circumstances with all this surveillance I have, and they're still getting in here. I thought, no, I got to get out. I'm leaving. And I basically got on an airplane and went to another country, which shall remain unnamed.
To finish the book?
To finish the book. And I got a lot of friends around the world because, I'm an affable guy. I don't play the celebrity game at all.
No.
And so I called on some friends, and they said, sure, we'll take you in. And I wrote the book, basically the main part of the book, sitting at their kitchen table with, the whole family life going on around me, the dogs jumping or capering around, the kids coming and going, rock and roll music playing. It's a wonderful, active family. And I was sitting there in the middle of it all writing my book.
Well, this was all being done, Whitley, in my opinion, to prevent you from finishing this book.
That's right.
How do you think they found out you were even working on it?
Oh, George, I live in a fishbowl. I have no private life.
Nah.
Whatever's going on, they are into me completely. And they didn't like certain things in the book. And I figured out what they were. And the end of the story is I rewrote parts of the book because there were vulnerable individuals who were going to be exposed.
Who did not want their names mentioned.
It's not their names. It wasn't names. It was something else. They didn't want something else mentioned because they are not here for bad reasons, and they would be very helpless. And I scared them. And because all of this sinister stuff happened because I scared them. And once they understood that I had figured out what their problem was and corrected it, everything became very smooth again. And so now I'm back from the war zone, and things are cool. And the book's out, and the things that were scaring them are not in it.
In a perfect world, Whitley, how do you think this contact is going to be unveiled, if it ever is? You and I don't agree with you and I agree disclosure is not going to become a public thing. But how does it leak out?
At this level, there may be more UFO disclosure, but I very much doubt that this level of it is ever going to be openly disclosed by the government, because I don't think they know how to do that, and I don't blame them either. But if that happens, it's going to happen in some kind of a very asymmetrical way, because whatever the visitors are, and however many different forms of them there may be here, I don't know. But I can guarantee you that asymmetrical will be how it unfolds. It's going to turn out that people are having dinner, and all of a sudden they look over and there's aliens in their living room.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's it's going to unfold in some completely unexpected way.
What's your best guess on why the abduction phenomena is occurring?
It was occurring. It's not occurring much anymore. We don't. First of all, understand, we don't know how many species were this was done to.
That's
it might
right.
not just be human beings, but whatever happened, their removal of sexual material means that it was something to do with the biology, with the bodies. And my guess is they have made a seed bank of humanity and maybe of everything on this planet against the possibility that the planet will self-destruct, and they will replant us on another planet somewhere in the universe that they probably found.
It's bizarre, isn't it?
Oh, yes. And I'm up for the adventure, frankly. This all started many years ago when I started going out in the woods in the middle of the night to indicate to them that I was ready for more.
And you're not afraid.
Yeah, I'm afraid. But
You don't show it.
That doesn't stop me.
You don't show it.
I'm more curious than afraid. And, Annie used to say, you're the type that definitely gets bitten by the snake. And
She was the toughie.
oh, boy. I mean, Anne, you did not fool with Anne. You fooled with Anne, you made a mistake.
Do you still have that implant in your cheek?
In my ear. Yeah. It's vigorous. I use it in all my books. It's a wonderful research tool. It's the best, boy.
We're with Whitley Strieber. His latest book is called Them. It is out now and available. How much does the government know, in your opinion?
It's probably very spotty because of the way the records have been handled. I think that when they say they don't have any materials and they don't have any evidence of alien contact, they're probably not lying, because I think that information is probably lost.
Forever?
I would guess so. No, I take it back. The information about the materials is in private hands. It's in the defense industry, I'm sure. And I think there's probably extensive study that's been done. And I'm not at all sure that the higher levels of the Defense Department have any access to records about that. They probably don't. But I think that some of those materials that have been examined in the past have been expressed into metallurgy and high energy coatings and radar absorbing coatings and all kinds of things like that we have developed. And that the way it's done is an individual or a company will patent something that has been worked on that came from wherever and that is not of this world, and they've developed some kind of process or system from it, and then they will patent this, and the license to manufacture will be sold to various entities, companies that are interested.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as there's a secure track in the company, they will be able to get the patent and to push all of this stuff out. And I'm absolutely convinced that many of the vastly improved medical prostheses that we have now, knees and hips that will easily last a lifetime, for example, are the result of the metallurgy that's been done while analyzing these objects, these bits of material that we've had.
Is there anything positive that comes out of this, Whitley?
Yeah, I am thriving intellectually and emotionally and physically very healthy, because I basically have been seriously challenged, and I'm up for the challenge. I think most of us are. And at the end of the book, I talk about coming into communion with them instead of fighting, because Annie always said, this is about communion. It's about something much deeper than a traditional friendship between nations. And we can go there, and we can do that. It can happen.
The Coast mobile app is now available for download on iPhones and Android devices. You can become an insider directly through this app. This is a great option for our international listeners, and new users will also receive a free 2-week trial.